You're listening to Upstream with Shane Morris on the Colson Center Podcast Network.
Welcome to Upstream, a podcast of the Colson Center. I'm Shane Morris. Why do you believe in Christianity? Well, ask people this, and you likely won't get the same answer twice. And that's fine. Scripture and history both testify that God uses very different means to bring his sheep into the fold. But that doesn't mean that all of these reasons for converting are equally strong, or even that they're sufficient reasons to convert. There's one reason in particular that's sufficient by itself and which trumps all of the other reasons. And it's one we sadly rarely hear. Well, I'm going to talk about that reason today with my guest, J. Warner Wallace. Jim, as we call him here at the Colson Center, is a veteran cold case homicide detective from Los Angeles and a longtime atheist who converted to Christianity after a sustained investigation of the Bible's claims using his training in forensics and the rules of evidence. He's a senior fellow here at the Colson Center and an adjunct professor of apologetics at Biola University and Southern Evangelical Seminary, as well as a faculty member at Summit Ministries. Jim is the author of several books, including Cold Case Christianity, God's Crime Scene, and Forensic Faith, all of which make the case for Christianity as a reasonable, historically defensible, and intelligent faith. Jim, welcome to Upstream. Well, tell us a little bit about how you came to faith in Jesus and why you think that an evidence-based approach is so central to the faith. It's that sort of it sounds less pious in a way, doesn't it? That you believe because of evidence instead of a leap of faith. Why do you think it's so important?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of folks who in the Christian family who would say, theologically, I'm not sure that you're in the right here, Jim. I mean, theologically, could you actually come to faith by way of evidence? And so I get that. So here's what I would say. I would say that it seems to me that it's possible for God to flip that switch for everyone and not only draw them to himself, but give them complete and full information, full knowledge of everything they would need to know to be saved. But interestingly, God doesn't do it that way. He calls, and then he uses us often to preach a message, to preach some information, to provide some information by which people respond and act after they've been called. I get all that. The only question is, what is the information that you're going to respond to? But what is it that's going to be said about the gospel, in defense of the gospel, in order to clear shrubs that are standing between you and the gospel? What is it we're actually going to say? And I think that depending on where you are and in what time in history you are, that's going to look a little bit different. Now, for me, I was about 35, and I always put it this way, as a story, as an analogy. If there was an alien who's from outside our solar system and he's flying into our solar system and he's got an assistant, and the assistant says, "Hey, we're about to land on Earth, and there's a bunch of Christians there. Would you like to do some research to see what it is they believe and how they, kind of interact?" Yeah, sure. Well, I got a book for you. It's called the Bible. That's their thing. That's what they use. So if you want to read it, you can see what they're all about. So as the alien, not knowing anything about Christians, you open the Bible and you read the Bible. Read the entire New Testament, including the book of Acts. Do you think you'd be surprised when you finally got here and you discovered what you discovered, both in terms of what Christians today believe and even in terms of how they interact with each other? What the life of a Christian. Remember, all you had to go by to begin with was the New Testament and the book of Acts, demonstrating what Christians do with each other and how they behave. I think you might be surprised. Well, I was that alien. I was 35 years old, and I didn't know any Christians, and I wasn't raised around a church or around Christians, had never been part of a church community, had never really been in an evangelical church for much of anything other than a funeral. And I stepped into that church for the first time because my wife wanted to go to church. And I wanted to please my wife. So I went. My dad would do that, by the way. My dad's not a believer, but he's had a couple of wives that he would be willing to do what it takes. He actually thinks that Christianity is helpful, even though it's not true. He thinks that Christianity is one of those things. He would rather live in a country in which there is filled with Christians than otherwise, even though he doesn't think it's true.
That ties in really well with what we're talking about today.
Yeah,
because this is aligns with one of the reasons we're going to talk about for why people often say they believe in Christianity.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And so I walked in without really any, and this to me was utter foolishness. It wasn't worthy of. I was not like Lee Strobel. Lee's a friend of mine, and when Leslie got saved, Lee thought, like, I'm going to show her it's wrong. I'm going to show her this isn't true. That was not me. There's no point in trying to show your wife that Barney the dinosaur is not a real dinosaur. Okay. That's how I kind of saw this. And this is like, okay, this isn't even worthy of my time. But I was willing to go and sit through whatever I had to sit through if it would make her happy. And she didn't really know what Christianity entailed either, but she wanted to find out. And so I said, okay, so I went. But as I listened to the pastor and ultimately bought a Bible, I thought I would just read the wisdom statement. I have the same Bible, it's still sitting here. I wanted to read the wisdom statements of Jesus because he said that Jesus was super smart. And I was like, really? Okay, I'll want to read the red letters. So I bought a pew Bibles just so I could do that. And I read through the Gospels. And as I read through the Gospels, there were some things in the Gospels that started to kind of pique my interest, just as somebody who had been trained in forensic statement analysis, somebody who did most of my team's interviews, I would do. So I dealt with a lot of witnesses, and I know what deception indicators look like. I know how people will tell lies and how they craft their statements so it appear that they're true. There was some stuff about the New Testament Gospels that I thought was just enough to make me want to test them. Using a template that I talk about in Cold Case Christianity, it's a template we use in criminal trials. And as I tested the Gospels, I was like stuck with I think they were reliable. I think they were telling me something true about Jesus of Nazareth. And that started me to think seriously about the claims of the New Testament. Remember, you can believe that Jesus is who he said he is still not be saved. You know, that's believe that. It's moving to believe in that makes the difference. And that took me a little longer. And that's really about trying to determine, is the Bible telling you something that's true, not just about Jesus? Is it telling you something true about you? And once I realized, oh my gosh, it's describing me perfectly, that I knew I had a need for a savior. And I kind of always intuitively knew that's who I was in terms of my behaviors, in terms of my thought life. And this was the kind of stuff that the Bible got really, I had to test it though to see if I could trust it at all before I could trust what it said about me.
By the way, for those who haven't read Jay's book, or for those who haven't read Jim's books, I highly recommend them. One thing in particular that really stands out in my mind, I think, was from Forensic Faith, the criterion for evaluating evidence in court. It's not absolute certainty. You know, it's not Cartesian certainty. It's really, and that's sort of how skeptics often approach the faith, as if we have to prove it with mathematical certainty. But it's really the standard of the best available explanation for the evidence. It's like, what best accounts for all of these lines of evidence that we have? Is it some ad hoc explanation that we can cook up to sort of get out of the possibility that it really happened, or is it that it really happened? And it's sort of an Occam's razor approach. And that was really helpful for me. I like that a lot.
Well, that is something we talk about, right? Because if you're looking at it in terms of like a Bayesian, like a formula, a probability, any kind of, you can think of whatever theory you like that helps you determine the probability of a certain event. Well, typically you'll see people actually reduce these to formulas. You put in the number of options, or, you have this long, complicated formula, and then you try to infer what percentage chance. That is not what we do in front of juries, because most juries will be going, really, I'm already tired. Okay, I'm not interested. We simply have a really straightforward jury instruction, which says, use your common sense, people. Okay. And we try to put people on, that's one of the things we're looking for more than anything else. I don't really ever usually talk about it that way, but that is what it is. You might say, in the past, I might like talk about 3 or 4 things that are really define what common sense is. We are looking for people who we think have some street sense, some common sense. And you know this, Shane, we've met people who are excellently trained, are brilliant. I mean, smart as a whip, right?
Right.
And have great PhDs and all, but they don't have any street sense, any common sense. And what we're looking for on jurors is, hey, because we're going to ask them to do what you just said. So what is the most reasonable inference from the evidence presented? And that sometimes requires more common sense than it does like brilliance. Like there's no as a matter of fact, sometimes I will be careful not to put people on the jury that I think have allowed pride because of their superior intellect. Sometimes that results in pride, and then you can't teach them anything. You can't show them anything. They've all got their mind made up before they even start. So a lot of times what we're looking for is a certain amount of humility. And that's where I think God really moved me, because I don't believe that anyone comes to faith until God first does something. He removes the enmity that we have against him. He removes that hostility. And he certainly did that for me. Also, he provided me with a sense of intellectual humility that I don't think I had prior, where I was willing to be taught something that I wouldn't just allow my presuppositional bias close my mind to something.
It's like
And
God
I
made you
think
into a good juror.
Well, I would have been a good juror that day for sure. But it didn't happen fast for me. So I would say it was probably a 6-month period of time.
So
From start to finish.
as we're talking about how we evaluate the evidence claims of Christianity, there are a lot of different ways that people come into the faith, and some of them are evidential, some of them are more experiential, some of them are what I would think of as even aspirational, like I want to move my life in this particular direction or become this type of person. We're going to talk about 6 of those, and I want everyone to understand very clearly that we're not dismissing these as illegitimate reasons to come to faith. These are part of many people's journeys toward the gospel, toward accepting the claims of Christ. They're perfectly valid. What Jim is saying in this video that we'll link you to in the show notes for the podcast is that they're insufficient reasons by themselves. They're not valid all by themselves for bringing you to faith. And they're very vulnerable, in fact, to attack by skeptics because of that. So you give these 6 reasons. We're going to talk through each of them one at a time. And I want you to kind of explain for us how they can be legitimate and then what they're vulnerable to in terms of an attack by a skeptic and why we need to be very careful not to base our faith on them. So the first is this. I was raised in the church, or another way of saying that would be my parents taught me to be a Christian. So I've kept my childhood faith. Walk us through this one. Where is it vulnerable?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people. That's the most popular answer I get when I ask this question around the country. Why are you a Christian? That is by far the most popular. They'll say, I've always been a Christian. As long as I can remember, I was a Christian since I was a kid. My parents were Christians. I was baptized when I was a kid because they were going to church and I was with them. But as a matter of fact, statistically, this is how most people in the world believe what they believe today. They believe it far more because their parents believed it than any other singular reason. And that's why Islam is growing as fast as it is, because it's not going by way of not being proselytized. It's not like it's some evangelistic.
It's not because of the crazy, awesome evangelistic crusades that Islam is holding.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of religions, including Christianity, probably were coercive at certain points in its history in certain small regions. I get that, but it's interesting that if you have less kids and you've been convinced by the world that kids are a burden and not a blessing. And so if you're a Christian and you're now thinking, most Christians in America are having 2 kids or less, but most Muslims in America are having 4 kids or more. And it's because you most likely believe what your parents believe, that necessarily you will eventually outnumber other belief systems if you will simply continue to have a bunch of kids. And that's why, honestly, my first advice now to young Christians is see children as the blessing they are described as in Scripture, not as the burden that is going to prevent you from having your best life now or having whatever financial goals you want as Americans.
Right.
It's too easy to get caught up in that. Now, okay, so why is this? Here's how I would say to all of these. If you can ask yourself this question, can members of another theistic worldview offer the same explanation? And if they did, would it be sufficient for you? And if your answer is no, that wouldn't be sufficient, well, then it's not going to be sufficient for you to say the same thing as a Christian. So I was raised by all atheists except my dad's second wife. He married somebody who became a Mormon after they got married. And together they had 6 kids that she raised LDS, even though my dad's not a believer in that or Christianity. So I've got 6 half brothers and sisters all raised LDS. And they would say that they're LDS, well, at least one of their explanations would be that they were raised in the church. And you would not accept that then as, then okay, that makes sense. Then that makes Mormonism, I'm going to join you. Probably that would not be sufficient for you. If you find that the explanation could be offered by everyone else and you wouldn't accept their view of it or that version of it, then you probably shouldn't be offering it alone. Now, this is not to say, though, that our explanations for why we believe are usually more, they're more diverse and they're more robust than just any one of these. It's usually a couple, 3 of these that kind of come together that will explain why. But that's why I'm hesitant on that, because if everyone's offering that, if atheists could say the same thing, and it wouldn't prompt you to become an atheist. If a Muslim says this, and then, by the way, that is the number one most offered explanation for why Muslims are Muslims, why Buddhists are Buddhists, why Mormons are Mormons, and why Christians are Christians. That's its weakness.
It's almost like a statement of circumstance more than of a reason to believe the faith.
Right. Well, how many times have you heard
became.
this? You're only a Christian because you were raised in a Christian culture. If you'd been raised in a Muslim culture, you'd have been a Muslim. So I think it's now. Do I think that's not even historically true for Christians, right? Christianity emerged in a place where there were no Christians, okay, and it's growing in underdog locations all over the globe right now. So I don't know that you could ever offer that as a true explanation, but I understand the impetus behind it and how an atheist or a skeptic might be able to leverage it against us.
Okay, so let's hit the next one here. I became a Christian because I wanted to know God, and this sounds extremely spiritual and even biblical. And you think it's, of course, fine in its own way, but why is it not convincing for you as an apologetic for the faith?
Okay, so I became a Muslim because I wanted to know God.
Right.
I mean, I can see that being said. I became, this is the problem, is that then that means that you haven't really isolated it as being any different than any other theistic proposal on the history of the planet, right? You could say, well, heck, I actually became a Zoroastrian. I believe I'm a Zoroastrian, I should say.
Right.
Or you could say I'm a Buddhist, or I could say there's a number of gods historically that preceded Jesus. And I suppose, the claims of these mythologies.
Well, I worship Ahura Mazda because, let's be honest, the Persians were awesome.
Yeah. So Krishna, whatever it is, right? You could find a way. If that's all this is that I wanted. The other question, of course, is that couldn't I also offer this for something other than God? I became a pantheist because I wanted to know nature. I don't know why that would, just because you want something to be true does not mean that it is true. It's because you want something to be powerful for you does not mean it's actually powerful in and of itself. It may just be that you're latching on to something that you need, that you want. And so again, there are people who became Christians, who are saved Christians today. They have trusted Christ for their salvation, and whose only chief impetus in the beginning was they simply wanted to know God. Great. So I think, what you said when we started is still true. These are not necessarily bad explanations. They're just not as good as they could be, especially in a world that is so pluralistic right now. Listen, it used to be that if you were raised in America, in a small town in Missouri in 1870, 1880, you didn't have access to what the world was thinking across the globe. It might be the only religious community you would even know was whatever religious community you happened to be in, because that was the only one in that region of the world.
Right.
But in 2020, when every single marginalized worldview is available with the same amount of authority online, now I think we have to be a little more diligent about why we say we believe anything.
Yeah, there's even a sort of an impetus to go pick out a really esoteric worldview that's special and unique and sets you apart from everyone else and makes you sort of an ideological hipster, right? And so that danger is even magnified by the apparent equality that we find online between creeds.
And think about this. If I have a platform on Twitter of, let's say 1 million people, because I'm a popular artist or I'm a popular singer or whatever it may be,
right?
I could actually achieve what you just said by crafting for myself my own version of what I think God is, and then just talking about it publicly. I have now uniquely set myself apart in terms of what and who I worship, and I've got a large following.
Yeah.
So I actually become authoritative, and there are lots of young people who will look to folks like this as authoritative. And we're in a world right now where, look, they were just, just a couple of weeks ago, I was reading about, and this has been going on for a long time, this idea that even mathematics, the 1 + 1 = 2 is a social construct. That even that is not an objective claim. That everything is a matter of subjective or cultural consensus. Well, can you see now how it's going to be hard? Well, look, this is the why I think in a world of micro-narratives where everyone's got their own view, the meta-narrative we call Christianity is going to be harder and harder to communicate and to embrace by a world that says, well, nothing really is overarchingly, transcendently true. Everything's a matter of opinion. So why would I think that any version of God would be in some different category?
The deans of those schools where professors are making the claim that even mathematics is socially constructed ought to try changing the numbers on those professors' paychecks and see if.
Yes.
See if
I always say that.
Subjective.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And in the end, that is exactly where the rubber meets the road. As at some point, all of us default, even when we make these wild claims.
Yeah.
And it may be about all kinds of other claims aside from mathematics. But it almost always, when it gets very personal, there's some place in some aspect of our lives where we reject these fancy notions we proclaim and we revert to what is clearly true. And objectively true, like for example, your bank statement. Yeah, you're not going to accept the fact that your bank decided that when you wrote a check for $100, it took $250 out of your account. Now suddenly you're going to say, no, there's an objective reality about that number 100. So I think you're right. That's where it always backfires. But again, this idea is why we're talking about it in the context of this, is that I do think we are getting to a place where for a lot of young people, that this notion that there is an objective reality about God's nature, let's say, if I want to know God, if that's the reason why I'm driven, I could actually create the God that I want to know. And that's why we're going to see a lot more of a smorgasbord approach to theism.
And the answer is going to be really similar to this next one, I suspect. And people often say, this is a common answer you get, I wanted to go to heaven. And it seems very biblical again, but it's still vulnerable to very similar attacks. Walk us through how you would respond to someone who said that.
Yeah. Okay. So as an atheist, this always bothered me. And I'll tell you why. I thought, okay, so basically you don't really even believe this. You just want the carrot at the end of the stick, and you're willing to believe anything as long as you get the carrot. It seemed like you're falsely motivated. Like as an atheist, I would have said, well, no, actually, I'm probably in a better, higher moral position than you are, because I'm willing to do the things that you do, thinking you'll please your God. I'm willing to do those without any God existing.
So when Paul said, I strive for the heavenly reward, when he said that I consider the present suffering is not worthy to be compared with the eternal weight of glory prepared for us, statements like that, you would have scoffed at him the same way you did at Christians who said, I'm just after heaven.
Oh, absolutely. And I would have said, and you see this all the time online, by the way. I just saw it on a post on one of our YouTube videos last week, where the atheist was arguing that, hey, I think we're in a better position than you guys are, because we do things out of just the nature of believing it's virtuous for us to do it. We don't think there's a heavenly reward. We don't think there's even a God to please. We don't even think any of that, yet we're still willing to do it without the carrot at the end of the stick. You folks are only doing it because the carrot's there. And even if you said, well, no, we believe we're gray-spaced, we're not like a works-based religion. Well, you believe there are rewards, and the rewards in some way which could motivate your behavior, couldn't they? And if that's the case, then you're not purely motivated. You're only motivated by. And so I think in the end, that is the problem with it. But again, like we always say, is a desire. Look, my hope as my dad gets older is that at some point he will look past the temporal nature of life and wonder if there's something out there after he dies.
Right.
And I'm okay if he makes that decision in the last 15 minutes. And I actually think that God is too. Now, do I know exactly how God measures that drive? He'll know my dad's heart. And I trust that an all-knowing being would know my dad's heart. And I think in the end, I think you do see a lot of people who maybe they're young and they have a critical moment in their life that really challenge. They think they sense their own mortality as a 20-year-old. And for the rest of their lives, they are believers because they have a sense that there is something beyond this, and I want that.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's a bad motivation at all. But I would still say as an atheist, well, yeah, number one, it seems like it's a little bit, it kind of mitigates the virtuous nature of your behavior, number one. And number two, doesn't everyone know in every system is that, I could say that, how does that separate you from the Muslim?
Yeah.
How does that separate you from any other theistic system?
It's either a pie in the sky or 72 virgins in the sky, right?
Right. Whatever the promise may be of the next life, or if you're going to be reincarnated and there's a judge, a karma judge that somehow determines what your next position is. In the end, no matter how you look at this, I think it wouldn't necessarily be unique. And that's the other thing I would say, is that all of the things we described so far are not unique to Christianity. They are common explanations that lots of people give in lots of different theistic systems.
Okay, so we've got two more here. Mm-hmm. And this one goes along with a very popular evangelistic attitude that I don't think is mistaken. And we even see it reinforced in the Bible when Peter says that we should live such good lives among the heathens that they will, see our righteousness and glorify God on the day of his visitation. But people will often say, I became a Christian because I wanted to change my life for the better. I wanted to have a more moral and upright and fulfilling life in that way. How is this a problem? Because again, we can marshal Bible verses in support of this.
Yeah, no, you could. I mean, like even Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, you are the light of the world.
Right.
Let your light shine such a way that your good deeds will be known to all men. So okay, and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So the atheist in me used to always kind of push back on this one also. It's like, okay, so do you do anything where there's nothing in it for you? Everything seems to have an end goal here with you guys, you Christians.
The
I'm willing to do this stuff when there's nothing in it for me.
The sharpest refutation for me with this is just knowing Mormons, because if you've met any Mormons, these are the nicest people on the planet.
That's right.
I mean, they're just a delight to be around, and it's almost like here's the hierarchy of politeness. You've got Canadians down here, and then you've got Mormons way up here. I mean,
and if they're that much above Canadians, if they're that much above Canadians, they're doing well, because I know lots of Canadians are the sweetest people, right? Like they don't want to make waves.
Right.
There's an apologist named Tim Barnett with Stand to Reason, and Tim is in Toronto, and Tim is one of the nicest, and he'll tell you that culturally he's just not comfortable. You're not to make those kinds of waves. Look, a lot of what you said is true, because I have based these reasons I often talk about. I've done so much work with Mormons because my own family were Mormons and atheists. So I had two groups to ponder. And when I first started looking at Christianity seriously, the first system I looked at when I first got interested in God was Mormonism, because I had so many Mormons in my family. And I felt like, okay, I could at least start this journey here and to see if it was true. I applied the same skill set to the Book of Mormon, Doctrines and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price that I applied to the New Testament Gospels. And so a lot of what I'm doing here is suggesting that, hey, when I said before, if another theistic system could offer the same explanation, what I'm really saying is if Mormonism could offer the same explanation, does that make Mormonism true? Does that make Mormonism the where you should be? And you're absolutely right. If you think that personal transformation is your goal, you should be a Mormon, because that was what you'll see. And if you moved into a new neighborhood, the odds are really good that the first person who knocked on your door with a care package was not a Christian. It was, in fact, the Mormon who lives in your neighborhood. That happens all the time. By the way, don't be surprised that in a works-based system where your salvation is dependent upon your good behavior, if people will outperform you there. They will, because their salvation is dependent on it. Now, we would say that we ought to be transformed, but there is a sense, and they call this that free grace. They think that's ridiculous. That's where they would push back. They would say, you Christians think that this is all for free, and therefore you say you're a believer, you say you're a Christ follower, and then suddenly you're doing all this stuff you shouldn't be doing. We've had some pretty big national scandals just this week of people who would say they're Christ followers, but maybe aren't doing what a Mormon was. Now, by the way, it's even more scandalous when a Mormon does it. Why? Because we know that they work hard. And they think their salvation is dependent. There's a thing in the back of our mind as Christians that says, well, yeah, but will God still forgive me if I do this? Right? There's always that metric that's going on in a lot of our minds. So I think this is one of the reasons why I look at this also and say, okay, if you're looking for personal transformation, by the way, so that means that you wouldn't be a Christian if there wasn't something in it for you, if there was no personal transformation in it for you.
Right.
Would you have believed this? So maybe you don't really believe this. You just believe the transformation part, and you value that, and you're willing to say anything in order to get that thing over there, or you're willing to jump into any system that gets you that thing over there. Then I'm not sure I could call that true. It's just you're motivated to try to become a better. It's like somebody who says, I now listen to pick your best self-help motivational speaker, who's not a believer. He's coming at it from a very secular self-help kind of way. Well, I know lots of people who will follow those speakers around the country, and they'll go to like 1 or 2 seminars a year because they really think that teaching has helped them to change their lives.
Yeah.
And they'll embrace that teaching, but it doesn't mean that person's God, right? It's just the teaching works for them.
It's like
that's why I think it's got limits.
It's like the class election where the candidate who promises to double Taco Tuesday and make a top Taco Wednesday as well wins the election because he's promising something to the other students.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why are we voting? That's why. So again, I'm always hesitant. So I always say it this way: the only 3 motives, and they're in Scripture, but I just didn't know they were in Scripture because I wasn't a Christian at the time I learned these. Working, but isn't that nice though that Scripture actually describes the world the way it really is? But when I was working homicides, I knew the only 3 things were behind any misbehavior, regardless of what the crime is, but especially homicides. That is sex, money, pursuit of power. Those three things, sex, money, power, I think it's in 1 John 2. Anyway, those three things are actually behind. And so I'm always asking, is what's driving you to believe this? Is there something in it for you in sex, money, or power? And a lot of times it is power, because what happens is we want righteousness. We want a transformed life that gives us respectability.
Right.
That's a subset of power. And a lot of times that's what's motivating us. But that doesn't mean the system is true. That just means that's your motivation.
So the last one you give in the video is that people will often say, I thought Christianity would work for me. And this is a very postmodern thing to say. It's ultra subjective, but in some ways it seems like it can encompass all of the other reasons, because it's just that it's that subjective attitude. I'm doing this because of, something I'm going to get out of it, which is my success in my spiritual life, or it's going to better me or benefit me in some way. So would you consider that the weakest of all of the reasons?
Well, again, on my mind too, a lot of times what I'm returning to is that sense in which I'm comparing something like Christianity with something like Mormonism. So I'll give you an example of this. Now, we don't happen to be in a culture right now where I think we would say that people are picking Christianity because it works for them, right? But I will tell you, when I was working with evangelizing Mormons in Salt Lake City, we would often hear stories because we were at the temple grounds. And at the temple grounds, you have people who are doing temple ceremonies. They will be coming in with bags, clothing bags, because they're going to get into gowns, into different wardrobes once they're in the temple to do either baptisms for the dead or marriages for the dead. They will be doing these ceremonies. People who are temple ready Mormons, they will often be certified by the bishop in their ward that they are of a certain caliber. They tithe a certain way. They have a certain respectable position within the church. And then they will wear temple garments, temple underwear. And this underwear, it leaves marks. In other words, if you're a man and you're wearing a suit, well, your underwear, your bottoms, will actually go about mid-thigh. And if you're sitting down, you'll be able to see the seam of the temple garment underneath your slack, if the slack is thin enough. I've had people tell me that actually, if you're somebody trying to get hired in Salt Lake City at several of these big firms, if they don't see that mark to know that you're wearing temple garments, you don't have the same chance you would have as somebody else who's not wearing those. And I've had that said to me by Mormons. So in a sense, it's like, hey, I might just believe, and I think a lot of men, especially within Mormonism, are not convinced that it has historical validity. What they're convinced of is that it has some practical value for their family, for their community, and even maybe this is why it's so hard when you're talking to someone who's been raised in a Mormon community to turn to something that is to say, maybe this doesn't even actually occur. Maybe nothing Joseph Smith said was actually true. You're asking them not to leave a worldview. You're asking them to leave a way of life that might also include their employer. And that's a bigger ask. And so there are a lot of folks who, I remember I worked a case where our suspect was in Salt Lake City. And I already was a Christian by this time, and I had taken several mission trips to Salt Lake City. But on this case, I had to spend an afternoon with a detective from the Salt Lake City Police Department. And we were doing a search warrant. We were swabbing people for DNA. And afterwards, we had dinner together. And the next morning, my partner and I, we flew out. And at dinner, he was talking about how many investigators, he would call them Jack Mormons, people who didn't want to leave the church because of the value it had, even within their own agency, but really didn't believe it was true. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So it might be that for a lot of people, they are in a system because it works for them.
It was working for them, even though they didn't believe it.
Yes, even though they didn't believe it, it still had some beneficial. Now, I think it's happening. That was probably true for a lot of American history, but I don't think that's true probably in 2020.
Right.
But so those are the reasons why, again, I'm almost always going back and asking the question, if you could say this about another faith system, it probably is not sufficient to determine why you should be a Christian.
Okay, so here we go. We've dealt with all of these common answers to why people say they believe in Christianity. Many of them are perfectly legitimate, but they're just not sufficient. So what is, in your view, the only sufficient reason to believe in Christianity? What's the one thing that you really hold as the bedrock reason to believe and trust in Jesus?
It's the same reason that I think it's the reason why I'm a Christian today. It's the only reason why I got in to begin with. It's the reason why I think my son David, I have two sons. Jimmy's a police officer. His pictures are back here somewhere. And David is he was a biochemist, and then he now is an anesthesiologist. And going through the hard sciences in a school that was not, there weren't a lot of Christians in that school. It was a challenge. But what kept him was that he knew it was true. And that's the best reason to be a Christian, because it's true. Because in the end, you can apply, you can test it, you can investigate it, you can examine it. If you took that same approach to any other theistic system, it will fall apart quickly. What were the people who wrote about this? Were they really there to see what they said they saw? Could they be corroborated in some way? Have they changed their story, or has anything changed over time? Any reason for me to now no longer trust those witnesses? And finally, do they possess a bias that would cause them to lie to me because they get something out of it in one of those three areas: sex, money, or power? So in the end, I am looking at those four criteria, which is the four criteria we use against any witnesses. You can apply them to the authors of the New Testament. You can apply that to the author of the Book of Mormon, or the authors of, or the compilers of the Quran. You can apply this to any theistic worldview. And if you do, you'll see that only one emerges, because it happens to be true. I don't often like it, Shane. I'm telling you, I find sometimes on this side of the cross that I still struggle like Paul in Romans 7, right? I know what I should do. I don't do it. I know what I shouldn't do. I keep on doing it. What a miserable person I am. I never felt that way before. Before Paul got saved, before Paul was even a Jew, do you think he ever cared about what his behavior was? I mean, I never cared about my behavior. I never judged it. I never worried about it. I never was grieving over my behavior. I celebrated everything. Every day was a new day.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as it was legal, I was good. But now I realize there's a lot of stuff that's out of bounds. And what keeps me is that this is true. And I think, honestly, that if you actually can demonstrate, if that's at least one of your reasons, if you're talking to people and you say, well, I was raised in the church, and it's also true.
Yeah.
Well, okay, you know what? God bless you. Good. But in the end, I think young people want to know, well, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I still think that in the end, truth is brutal this way. That truck is either heading toward you or it's not, and your opinion is not going to change it. That safe is falling out of the sky. It's either going to hit you or it's not. And I think in the end, truth is that brutal.
Yeah.
And we do want to know. I'm looking right now for a cure for coronavirus. Well, my opinion is not going to make it the cure. If that's the case, I got a cure right now. It's called Monster Energy drinks, okay? I drink one of these every day, okay? And I tell you, that's the cure. By the way, a lot of people now are going to say he's a pagan because he's drinking Monster Energy. Whatever. The point I'm trying to make is my view and my opinion that is the cure. It turns out there is something at some point when push comes to shove, we become objectivists about lots of different truths. Not everything's a matter of opinion. And if there's a cure for what's killing us spiritually, it'll be no more a matter of my personal opinion than this monster is the cure for COVID. In fact, there is a cure. If there is going to be found a cure, it'll be the cure based on the cure itself, not my opinion of what it is. So in the end, I needed to know, is this thing that people claim about Christianity true objectively, regardless of my opinion about it? Because I'll have days when I'm not going to like it.
Yeah.
And then the question is it still true?
It seems like truth in this way functions as the hub of sorts in a wheel where we can access it or reach toward truth through a variety of means. And the spokes of the wheel are sort of like these other reasons that we've heard, because truth is ultimately very beautiful, right? It's very pleasing. Truth ultimately, in this case, does lead to a better life. Truth ultimately will help you to know God, the God who really is and who really became incarnate in Jesus Christ. And so you get the whole package when you seek for truth. It reminds me of this great passage in the Screwtape Letters where Wormwood's uncle Screwtape is trying to persuade him to get his patient, who's a human he's tempting, to think about every idea except for whether something's true. So he says, in essence, get your patient to think about whether an idea he's embracing is courageous or stark or modern or fashionable in this way or that, or manly, or any of these other adjectives. The one thing you must make sure he never asks is whether or not it's true. because that's the only thing that matters. And Lewis really put his finger on it in that case. The thing that matters most of all is whether or not Jesus really is who he says he is.
Yeah, I love that book, and it's sitting on my nightstand right now. And yeah, I just think that you're absolutely right. In the end, like my son said, David, I had him come and do a class on So the Next Generation Will Know It, Biola. And David had a section of that where he was teaching from it. And he talked about how during those days when he was in college, when he was in university and, doing work with, cystic kidney disease and all these different things he was doing and all the hard science stuff. And even in those times of rebellion, when you're like, hey, it'd be nice if this wasn't true. It's kind of that rubber band theology, right? You can just go so far, but in the end, it's going to snap back. So the further you go, the more it hurts when it snaps back. Don't go too far, just go far enough. But in the end, if you know it's true, you're not going to go too far from it. Because in the nagging in the back of your mind, or the 8 to 10 reasons why there is a God, and that Christianity is the one view of God that is, because again, unlike other views, our view of God is not like a fortune cookie view based on the proverbial statements of this dude named Jesus. Not based on the proverbial statements of Buddha or Confucius. No, it's based on an event called the resurrection. If that didn't occur, this is a deck of cards that falls. This is a house of cards that falls. Mm-hmm. So it all comes down to an event, which is wonderful because we can't test the wisdom of Buddha in the same way we can test historical events. That's why we can actually make this claim. This is why my Mormon family they can claim a lot of things. They were raised in the church, that it has some great benefit for their lives, that they had an experience that demonstrated it was true. Everyone says these things. What they can't say is it's evidentially verifiable. Because if any claim of the Book of Mormon, none of those claims, there's not a single piece of archaeology, not a single ancient building in which a single name from the Book of Mormon can be found anywhere on planet Earth. There is not a single coin of all the coins described in the Book of Mormon, the swords, the shields, the chariots, the animals described on the North American continent that Joseph Smith said were here. There's not a single fossil record of any of those things here. There's not a single way to corroborate a single claim. You cannot draw maps of the Book of Mormon. There are no maps in the Book of Mormon because there are no factual claims in the Book of Mormon that can be substantiated. That should be a wake-up call. That if you can say, I'm here for every reason except it's true, maybe you shouldn't be there.
Amen. And we believe because what we've been told in the Gospels is verifiably true. It's historical reality. And not only is it fulfilling, but it's also the true story of the world. And we're invited into that story, which is true and also happens to be beautiful and will change your life. My guest today has been J. Warner Wallace, longtime cold case homicide detective and the author of Cold Case Christianity and other books on apologetics. You can find out more about Jim's work at coldcasechristianity.com. Jim, thanks so much for joining me today on Upstream.
Thanks for having me, brother. Had a good time.
Thanks for listening to Upstream with Shane Morris. For resources and more commentary on Christianity and culture, visit colsoncenter.org. Upstream with Shane Morris is a production of the Colson Center Podcast Network.